Okay, everybody, welcome to Crushing It. We're at the show where risk meets opportunity and where we dig into the real stories behind success. Today's guest is a great special treat for me. He brings a perspective that you don't hear from outside closed rooms. AJ Costigan is a former FBI professional who went on to lead security and operations for some of the most iconic golf events and venues in the world. Across his career, he's dealt with all the kind of high-pressure moments that test judgment, leadership, and resilience. From coordinating complex event operations and managing unexpected crises and keeping thousands of people safe. What makes JJ's story powerful isn't just the environments he's worked in, but how he approaches them. Clarity over chaos, preparation over complacency, and a deep understanding of people, processes, and risks intersect the real world. So today we're talking about what he's learned along the way, the moments that shaped him, and how those lessons translate far beyond security into leadership, teams, and navigating uncertainty. JJ, welcome to Crushing It.
Glad to be here, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Dealing with these large events in the golf area. And I think people are just kind of unaware, they go to and view these events, not even thinking that there's this whole logistics area and chain behind it. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, how you got to being in those positions in the first place.
Sure. It really comes down to what you get exposed to in the Bureau. And I was lucky enough or fortunate to see some large scale events in Baltimore, one of which was the Preakness. I was in charge of the team there as far as executive management, and that really exposed me to how it was not a sporting event, but really just a mass gathering of people and the complete spectrum of people, from kids who are partying to executives, the governor, all sorts of VIPs, and how they all melded together and how you had to manage the risk for each one of those categories because they differed quite differently. And that got me my taste of mass gathering risk management, I suppose. And then that carried on. When I left the Bureau, I went to a Fortune 100 company called Exelon. And there I was the director of physical security. And my job was to keep critical infrastructure safe and keep people away from it. And when you marry those two, it's kind of the same. You're trying to keep people and critical components safe at the same time, making sure that everybody comes and goes safely. And then that translated into going into the golf industry.
So where did you start out in the golf industry? Because you went down to the Carolinas, correct?
Sure. I went down to interview for a job at Augusta National back in the beginning of end of 14 or beginning of 2015. And I was very lucky. My old supervisor in the FBI, Tom Cherigo, was one of the security principals for the PGA Tour at that time. And I sat down with him before going down there to get a better feel for what I might be walking into. And he was very gracious, and we sat down for quite a while and talked about a number of risk issues. And that somewhat prepared me to go down and interview. And then subsequent to Augusta, I ended up at Live Golf and did tournaments all over the world, which was very exciting as well.
So now my impression as an outsider would be that, if you get a job managing security at a golf event, you would think that that's a fairly relaxing golf job. I think when I heard that years ago, I just pictured you kind of, ambling around the golf course and making sure the litter was picked up. Am I wrong?
Yeah, that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I think I saw the first swing of the tournament and the last swing of the tournament, and every other minute in between was occupied at the gates, at parking, at transportation, at player security, at guest security, VIP security. It was not at all about the golf. It was not a leisurely stroll on a golf course that you imagine. And there are so many moving parts behind the scenes to make it all seem smooth and easygoing. It's amazing. It was like taking a drink out of a fire hose when I first started doing it. And then as you get a process and a repetition and you make the personal relationships with the people that you're working with, you can fine tune it and it becomes much easier to manage.
Now, you managed the security for these really large golf events. Was there something part of that tournament that was could not fail, that was always the priority, or how did you divide that up? Were there different channels of different, because I'm you talk a little bit about these different groups of people that come together in these large events, and they probably all want to have fun in a different way and probably even have a different perspective they don't even want to think about risk. There's probably groups that are looking for
Right.
some type of risky behavior and others that are not. So I guess, is there one guiding principle or guiding must fail part of the event or part that can't fail? Or how do you work all that together?
It's like when you're preparing for a tournament, if you imagine you're layering the defense. At Exelon, I work with a guy, Spencer Wilcox, and he came up with this term. I don't know if he came up with it, but it was defense in depth. And it's very similar to when I was in the Navy as a pilot. The carrier was the center of the most valuable critical asset. And then you had screens going out, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, aerial cover, and you created this bubble around it. And that's what you do at a golf tournament for any mass gathering. You have a critical centerpiece, and then you layer the defenses on top of each other so that if one were to fail, perhaps another one would pick it up. And you keep creating this web of defenses until you've got a solid screen. And that's where having relationships with different public and private entities really made a difference. Great example is drone coverage. When I started, drones weren't a thing, and then they came online, and you really had to come up with a plan for what are you going to do if a drone comes overhead and interrupts the play, lands on the green, drops white powder on the crowd. There's all sorts of things that could cause mayhem and disrupt the event. So I used a company called Aerial Armor, and they were great. We set up what I called response teams or pounce teams with police officers at the various locations we were at. And they actually had an app on their phone. When the drone was detected, they got alerted and it showed where the operator was, and they could force the drone down, go to the operator and tell them to, land it. And those are the evolving technologies that really helped mitigate different threats. But when you layer them all on top of each other is when you get that protective screen, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I like the picture between the naval battle group and a golf tournament, and something I can see what you're talking about, but something I would not have thought of on my own.
You start screening, maybe a mile or more away from the tournament, and you train police officers what you're looking for, what concerns you, the parking attendants as they're loading people in, what might be suspicious, the people who are handling the gates, what looks like a suspicious person. I mean, you basically know what a golf aficionado looks like. I mean, they're wearing shorts and a floppy hat or a baseball hat, and they come in. But when you see somebody out of the ordinary, that gets kind of crazy. And I've had people show up, one guy dressed in ninja black, carrying a black box, and he wanted to drop it off and leave it at the gate. I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
To the credit of the people out in the parking lot, they saw it and relayed it, and we had it interdicted and screened and so forth. So things happen. People leave cars running in the parking lot, and you have to have a process for dealing with each of those things. When a car's running, before we even touch it, we would have a dog go over it, a canine, for bombs and explosives. And that sounds very pedestrian, but in one instance, the dog alerted on the car. And so then we had the bomb team go in and look at the car, and it had a blanket and a pillow crumpled up on the back seat, similar to like some, you always go to the dark side, some terrorist sleeping in the car and leaving a bomb in the trunk.
Right.
Would it be a problem? We were getting ready to tow the car out of the parking lot, and the owner of the car comes walking out, and we talked to him. Well, the blanket and the pillow, which to us were a little suspicious, was because he had driven for 15 hours straight to go to the tournament. And then the trunk was hit by the dog because this guy was a computer printer salesman, and he had a load of, I think they were laser cartridges in the trunk, which have a very small amount of an explosive component, which is used in the laser process, and combined and concentrated in this trunk was enough for the dog to hit on the car. Jeez. So, I mean, there's crazy things like that happen, and you're always going to the dark side, but that's the way you have to look at things.
Right. Yeah, and I guess thinking about those types of instances, they must be more challenging than ever right now, because it seems like there's a lot of people out there that are trying to provoke law enforcement or elicit a response, whether it's through, these guys that like to film law enforcement officers with their phones now, or protesters that are just trying to get someone, some more, security staff to overreact.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have mature teenagers, they're mature people who are acting like teenagers, trying to push the envelope, trying to see what kind of reaction they can get. And one of the quotes one of the police officers used for me was, and when we briefed it to the team of police officers, it was be nice, be nice, be nice until you can't be nice anymore.
Yeah.
And we always tried, no matter where the tournament was being held, was to stay within the cultural norms of what's expected and make people feel safe. And when you have SWAT at the gates, sometimes some people might be off put, but now it makes people feel better. And you just had long guns there in case someone tried to do a mass casualty event before they even got to the security protocol. So, you're looking at your weakness and how can you deflect and push away those types of things. So it was always kind of interesting to see how far out you could push the defense perimeter.
Yeah. Do you think people's perception of, I guess, the tactical side of law enforcement, talk about the long guns and the response teams, has changed with people over, the past 10 years? Because in the past, people think that's unusual and wonder what's going on. Has that changed?
Well, when you look at it's very interesting because traveling with Liv around the world, you get a different perspective on people's expectations. And here in the US, people are much more willing to accept that type of presence. When I was in England, outside of London, doing a tournament, there was absolutely almost no police presence. There was no on-site tactical team. There was nothing. And having these conversations with the London police, it's all threat-based, and they view the proliferation of weapons in the US as one of our biggest problems and one of the biggest differences between mass events. And in the US, after 9/11, the number of mass shootings that have happened, people are more accustomed to seeing that tactical presence. Whenever I use them throughout the country, I would always sit down with them ahead of time and preach that be nice, be nice, be nice until you can't, because people respond to that in a positive way. So they weren't wearing masks, they weren't wearing baklava and all that craziness. They were just there to ensure that people were safe and felt safe walking into the tournaments.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's always a fine line you have to walk where people want to feel safe and not threatened either by other spectators, but also by, law enforcement and security themselves. They don't want security getting up in their face unnecessarily. So you're right. It takes a lot of maturity.
And you really have to preach that. It was interesting. They weren't even used to magnetometers in the UK for the most part, which was shocking. But if they don't have guns that readily available, it wasn't as big of a threat issue. But I insisted on having mags there just based on my experience here in the U.S.
Now, you talked a little bit about Liv. You started at Augusta, and then how did you shift over to the Liv tournaments? What did that look like?
Liv was a lot of fun, and it was a great team there. I really enjoyed that. And what was interesting was it was just getting off the ground. I was hired before their first tournament, and everybody was trying to get the process up and running, from getting the players to travel to security. I mean, it was just an entire startup, and that mentality was very fun to work in. Greg Norman was a great guy to bounce things off of and very supportive of the security function, which was nice. You have to have support from the top when you're doing these types of preparations, because if you don't, that just bleeds on down and creates cracks in your defense. It's so important. It's like insurance. You don't need it until you need it.
Right.
And they would wonder why we had, wherever you were, why we had certain components, whether they're tactical or responsive, around. It's not what they're doing at the moment, as someone told me once in the FBI. It's what you have the capability to do if it's needed in a timely fashion. Right. And so that's really important for people to understand. You may not know why you have this many doctors or nurses or EMTs or so forth. And it's a cost and it's an expense. But if you don't have them and you need them, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah. And I guess sometimes it looks, to the outsider a little bit like overkill. Like if you see an event and you see like a ton of security just standing around, like the layperson might say, well, that's just a waste of money. But actually their presence may be preventing something from happening that you just, it's better to prevent an incident from happening than just kind of hoping for the best and then responding, and then it becomes a far more
Absolutely.
expensive and damaging event.
And you gotta spend the time up front training everybody as well. You can't just hire people and expect them to perform. You have to sit down with them, explain your expectations, and explain what you need to know about and what's important to move along the communication chain.
Yeah, would you say that's probably the biggest challenge?
Yes, training was a big one, but also comms. If I was putting on a large mass scale event, it's pretty standard to have a command post. I mean, we were used to those in the FBI when you had a big event coming up, and you'd bring in what I called the head shed, all the decision makers from the state, federal, and local agencies into one room. So if you had an issue, you could jointly resolve it. As part of that, you have to have a serious tabletop exercise ahead of time with those same decision makers who are going to be in your CP, because you have to establish lanes, who's going to do what if something happens. And it's not just first responders, it's also public affairs, communications, internal communications. You want to have the same message going out to people attending the event on all different mediums. You don't want conflicting information. You have to control what's going on, and that command post is critical. I just can't stress that enough. And the other part of that is interoperability of your radios. You can't have fire on one, police on one, sheriffs on one, state police on one, and so forth. You have to have everybody be able to communicate. And we used a company from Augusta all over the world, or all over the US, to help us, because we would give out radios to the people that needed to respond in a timely fashion. So there was no latency in response. And
Mhm.
that was huge. The communications piece, you just can't overemphasize.
Yeah, I remember there's always a challenge in the bureau too, just to get
Yeah.
the radios to work
Yeah. We
was
had coded
yeah.
radios and nobody else did. It was a big difficulty in communicating, and having that capability was enormous.
Yeah, JJ, when you talk about the communications, the command post, and needing to train everybody, I'm starting to see more and more like that, where that the naval battle group and the
Yes,
golf tournament kind of are very similar, at least from a structure standpoint.
absolutely.
So, were there any like? Can you talk about like? Was there an event that you ever felt really tested your team, like the ability to respond, and you kind of had to kind of? I think we've all had critical incidents where we had to just kind of make stuff up on the fly.
I think, yeah, yeah. No, there's a number of them, and I think each tournament always had something memorable that happened. It could be a medical event, it could be parking. One tournament, golly, we were in Massachusetts, and the live tournaments start with a skydiving team, and they're ex-Navy SEALs, and they jump out and they come down with all sorts of flags hanging from the skydiver, and the crowd loves it. The American flag's the last thing to come down. It's great. It's like you see at a football game. And I guess it was Thursday, because or no, it was Wednesday, because the turns were Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They were doing their practice jump, and the plane comes over, drops a streamer, and then they jump out and come down and pop their chutes, do their landing, and they practice. So they're ready for the day when the people are there. And I'm in a golf cart with Jeff Stanley, who was one of the FBI guys who was helping me at Live. And we're watching them jump out, and they're coming down, and his chute goes out, and it's a streamer, and it doesn't open. And it's a very hilly area where we are, and we're down on a lower hole. And I look up, and he goes behind the tree line straight down into the ground.
Hmm.
And we weren't expecting to have a fatality the day before we started the tournament. And, we go screaming over there as fast as we can in our golf cart. And we come around onto the next hole, and we see the guy picking up his chute, rolling it up. And I go over to him and I was like, "What happened? We saw you, coming behind the tree." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I had to hit my reserve. It opened at about 200 feet, and it's all good. We'll see you tomorrow," and walked off. And my heart was pounding like a crazy person. We had a guy walking in Portland with an AK automatic weapon, without a shirt and no shoes, in Portland, in front
Hmm.
of the Players Hotel. I called the police and I said, "I need somebody down here. We got a guy with an AK." And he said, "Well, is it loaded?" And I said, "I have no idea." And he goes, "Well, it's not against the law if it's not loaded. So we're not going to send anybody." And so to your point, we had a plan on how we were going to bring the players into the hotel, get them into the hotel, and we had to adjust and go around to the back door of the kitchen, in through the kitchen, then up through the employee elevator up to their floor. And we had players en route as this guy is viewed outside the hotel. And it's one of those things where you have a plan, but you just can't be married to it. You have to be flexible and you have to adjust. We had a bomb threat in Florida that shut down the tournament. They said there's a bomb on I guess it was like the sixth hole in the bushes on the sixth hole. So I had to call, what's his name? He was our rules official. And I said, we're going to have to stop the tournament. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, we got to stop the tournament till I get dogs out to clear the sixth hole. And so we stopped the tournament and went out there, and I had the bomb team go down through the hedges and the bushes and everything. And at the same time, in our command post, we had the Miami-Dade working the backside of it to see where the call originated from. And they were able to track it down, identify the caller, who turned out to be an employee who got fired that day and called in a bogus bomb threat. And we were able to get the tournament back up and running in about 20.
I imagine there's probably some pressure to kind of resume play as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And, they were very, very concerned about that. So and that was the beauty of Live, the way they did a shotgun start. You still had play coming through 18 and where the majority of the patrons were. So we were kind of lucky in that regard, but we had to shut it down, and it was a big deal. But you have a plan, we knew what we were going to do if something like that happened. And, it was just one of those things. People do crazy, and you just have to try to anticipate it.
Yeah, you mentioned about security being, it's most effective when it's from the top and from leadership. So when you had to stop the tournament for a period of time, was there any, I guess, after action or questions about that? Or because now, security stopping the actual tournament.
Yes.
And I'm sure the longer it would go on, the more there's like the leadership's going to be gritting their teeth, I guess, or, because that's a lot of money. You got really high paid players and everything that's on hold.
Absolutely.
At that point.
My hat was off to, I guess, David Faraday in the booth, being able to talk through some of the delay, because you don't want to say what it is, but you do have a delay. They were totally supportive. They totally got it. It was also we had federal assistance on that tournament, as we had some very high level VIPs in attendance, and we were able to get it up and running rather quickly. But yes, there's always going to be pressure to, keep things moving along. It's like that. We had a concert in Australia, and we had a plan for how to keep the crowd from rushing the stage. It was I think the performer was a very high level rap artist. It got to the point where our plan was not working. The crowd was surging, and we had to open the cattle gates, as I call them, the fencing, the portable fencing, to let the people get up towards the stage, because it just got out of hand. And that was going to be a problem. I was debating, that same issue. Do we tell the performer to take a break, or what are we going to do here? We had a plan, and we had to adjust.
Now, were there certain when you moved into this area for golf tournaments, there are certain innovations that really took you by surprise?
Innovations,
like
as far as
either technology or ways that things were done.
I thought, when I first started, I found out that the command post concept was one that was important. The mass notification system is really important. When you have a lot of employees and contractors and first responders, getting their cell phone numbers and being able to communicate with them in a timely fashion is huge. And golf's an outdoor sport, so you could have a thunderstorm coming in, a rain delay, and you don't want people showing up, to work a tournament and being told, you're in a delay for 4 hours. Just go chill, because they can't sit in their car for 4 hours. And it becomes problems. The mass notification systems one that texts you, emails you, and calls you is fantastic because it's really a great way to get information out. And you can create subgroups so you can just blast one message to employees, one to contractors, one to law enforcement. It's a great tool. And that I learned that one at Exelon and carried that forward. And that was a great technology. The drone mitigation is good. I think that you've seen it in the Ukraine war where the way to defeat a drone system is to saturate it. If you send 10 or 20 drones, the system just can't keep up and then you're stuck. So I'm sure there are companies out there that are trying to deal with that issue. I would certainly have a crisis response team. That's another one.
Hmm.
Identify the decision makers, both in your organization and outside, that you need to pull together at a crisis. And a crisis can be a parking issue. At one tournament in Florida, they contracted for this giant parking lot adjacent to the golf course. And we found out that once the cars got in and disturbed the sand, they couldn't get out. And so now
Oh
we
boy.
had thousands of people stranded in the heat, in the humidity, in this giant sand parking lot. And that was one of the little mini crises that you had to deal with.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because a lot of times, from a security perspective, we think of crisis response as far as like, bomb threat or shooter, but a parking lot. Well, when you started talking about it, I thought the parking lot just was going to be unavailable, and then you
Yeah.
have all these cars looking to park somewhere else, which in itself would be a crisis. But the fact that they can't get out, I could see that could actually mushroom into something greater, where if you have people in the heat sitting in their
Yep.
cars for hours, then you start rolling from inconvenience to
Medical emergency.
medical. And
And you think about the demographics of a golf fan, it's probably middle to elderly, and you've got people who might just fall into a medical situation and can't move their car, cardiac arrest. I mean, there's all sorts of things that get that way. Having your team trained on basic first responders, so you can do CPR, that type of thing. That's a basic, but I had to do that several times, perform CPR on people who went down. So those things are interesting. Facial recognition is huge.
Mhm.
If you think about it, you're in this giant crowd and you lose your 10-year-old son or daughter. I mean, you know what they were wearing. And at Live, we had a great team there, and you could bring in a picture of what the child looked like on your phone if you're a parent, and the facial recognition would search the gates both in and out to see when this child was last seen. So if someone takes them and has taken them out, you're going to be able to spot it. That gave me a great sense of comfort. But you also have some legal issues with that. You have to display a disclaimer at the gate people can see saying that they're being recorded. Your face will be recorded entering this property, this private property. But even worse than a child, or not worse, but just as bad, is an elderly parent. A lot of
Mhm.
people, it's their bucket list to go to a golf tournament, and they show up and their dad is with them and they might have Alzheimer's, and you get separated, you can't find them.
Yeah.
You can be lost for a long time. And then the last part of that is your frequent flyers who are problematic. I mean, we had stalkers and stuff, people who just got over the top in their seeking out of autographs and contact and selfies with the players. And once you had identified that person, you could put them in your screen. And then when they came through the gate, you would know they were on the property and you
Mhm.
knew what they were wearing. And you could tell your team to be on the lookout around this player for this person. And very helpful. Facial recognition was a great tool for
So
this.
did you have people that were stalking that would follow from tournament to tournament that were?
Yes. It was something that I never anticipated, but yes, they'd be repeat offenders, or frequent flyers, I called them, and they just show up at the next tournament. And so when I saw them coming in or got an alert, I would go and find them and have a chat with them before anything. And I said, if I see you within so many yards of this player, you're going to be asked to leave. Keep that in mind. And it lets you be a little proactive instead of reactive, which is what we all
Right.
want in security.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to the communications part. So you talked a little bit about that mass notification system. Did you use that to inform the spectators as well, or was it just for internal coordination?
Primarily, it was for internal coordination. The spectators, well, obviously at Augusta, they don't have phones, so you have no way of
Oh, okay.
contacting
Okay.
spectators, but they have great communication plan there. But on Live, we did not use it for spectators. It was not, you had to have message boards and other communication means to get messages out to the spectators.
So, JJ, I got to ask, you talked a few times about, crazy folks that are out there. And I think when we were talking in our previous call, you talked about some people that were, gluing themselves to the road or the vehicles.
Yeah, yeah, that was crazy. That was one I didn't see coming. Apparently, in England, this is a thing where protesters will superglue themselves to vehicles or structures or doors or so forth with superglue. The London police have a team that goes out and unsticks them in a humane way. And at the tournament in London, there was concern that it was the beginning of Live, and they were concerned about the Saudi issue and the Saudi backing and support of the league. And there were supposed to be protesters. And one of the intels from the police was that there was a plan to superglue themselves to the entrance to the where the players were going to be coming in. I mean, literally glue themselves to the street. So there had been historical anecdotes of people doing it on I think it's called the M4. It's like the Beltway of London, where they
Mm-hmm.
glued themselves to the ground and stopped traffic on the Beltway of London. I mean, it's just crazy. So we were trying to figure out how to mitigate this. And we decided to take sand that was used for the sand trap and spread it for 100 yards either side of the entry into the club so that they wouldn't stick to the ground.
Uh-huh.
So they peel off and they just be covered in sand. And I thought that was an interesting adjustment. But yeah, that was one I did not see coming when we were going to London, was that people were going to glue themselves to things. And I guess, I don't know if they still do it, but that was three years ago, I guess. And it was a very interesting plan to eliminate that threat. Yeah, there are
Yeah,
people
so
do.
it seems like you have like this growing stack of scenarios for these events that people would never otherwise think about, and we talk a little bit about tabletop exercises. I think that experience would probably inform a lot of these exercises that you do with leadership ahead of time, like the parking lot scenario, or people glue themselves, or lost kids. All these different.
Yeah.
Do you run through all those things with the leadership, or do you just stick to?
Well,
I mean, sounds like a growing book of things you can throw at
yeah.
people.
What I would try to do is bring together a scenario that would involve every one of the agencies that was participating, because you want the other headshed leaders who are making decisions to know the capability of the teams that were there. And so it might be uh, a mass casualty event associated with a active shooter, or a mass casualty event with a drone dropping a white powder substance. You can think of so many different things where you could create mayhem at a golf tournament, and how you would react and try to respond in the most effective manner, but also letting people know what resources are out there to help them make better decisions when they are responding.
Hmm.
So it was a test to get everybody involved, but it really helped. And everybody was, pretty appreciative when you were done trying to figure it out. And I attended other people's tabletops as well. I went to one that was really interesting with the Waste Management Open. They have a lot of things going on there, and it was very interesting to see how they did the same thing. So it's not rocket science, but you got to do it, because if you don't, when it hits the fan and you haven't done it, you're going to have some speed bumps to get over.
Yeah. So looking back, what's one thing you would tell business leaders about building resilience into their organizations, or handling some of these large scale events?
I think it's about continuity of operations. How are you going to handle things? And we learned that in the bureau. How are you going to handle when issues arise? You got to have a plan. Don't get married to it. Be ready to get everyone together, and then have a backup plan in case you can't meet at the command post. Like, what's your backup command post? Where are you going to have press if your press center was out of commission? You still have to get the information out, but you have to have a capability and know where to go, because I mean, you saw it after cell phone lines were jammed. We couldn't even
Hmm.
keep up with it. And so if you don't know where you're going, if the main meeting spot is down, you're already taken out of the equation. Everybody has to know that, and that's the training piece. I think training is key, and having people on board as soon as possible when you're planning an event. You can't wait till the end, because people are resources and they're going to have to take away from one to add to yours. And you really need to have those things nailed down ahead of time. It's always a moving target. There's no doubt. And there's always wrenches that get thrown in. Maybe a VIP shows up that you weren't expecting. You have blue on blue issues. Are you going to let armed people who are escorting a VIP in with other armed people? How are they going to know each other? How do you identify folks? I mean, there's a lot of things you have to prep and talk through ahead of time. So the preparation is key, and getting the head shed together ahead of time is very, very key.
Yeah, JJ, I think you kind of touched on some pretty important points, probably for any business, that security is really kind of driven from the top, or it should be, to take it seriously. And it takes some investment of time and resources where, when you talk about tabletop exercises or developing a plan, that's more than just putting some money at a problem. That's actually, the leadership has to spend some time thinking it through and go participating in the exercise ahead of time to kind of build the organization's response capability.
Absolutely. You can't say enough about having the executive support. And that was the same at Exelon. We had a wonderful leader, former FBI guy, Ed Getz, and he knew the importance of security and educated the board on why it was important, why we had to do certain things. And that created the executive support that drifted down and helped us do our job better.
So yeah, you kind of touched on something interesting, like, educating the board, that they are not necessarily involved in operational decisions. In a time of crisis, they're probably not going to be making decisions as we go along. They'll be informed of the event. But you talked a little bit about building that executive support through the board, which I think is a good point, where, kind of creates that awareness at the top. So, security leaders or business leaders taking the time to educate board members about that. It's probably a long-term investment, but that's, if you want to build culture, change culture, it really has to start, at both executive leadership and the board level.
Absolutely. And you have to take real world examples and make them applicable to whatever industry you're in. There are things that happen in the US where you could easily see it happening to your company, and it may be in a different fashion, but it could still happen. And when you take those scenarios and educate people in your specific industry with real world examples, it drives a very distinct point that, we are vulnerable. This is what we need to do to mitigate it. And if you don't mitigate it and this, then, there will be an issue if something happens down the line. And it's the difference between, again, being proactive or reactive. And you can't eliminate everything, but you can do your due diligence and make yourself a stronger entity.
Yeah, and you mentioned similar events happening in other organizations, and sometimes board members or executives can help build resilience by just simply asking questions like, what are we doing about this? I read about this. Do we have something in place to handle this
Exactly.
type of event? And if the question, the answer may be yes or no, but the company either informs the board member, this is what we're doing, or we'll get back to you on that, or, kind of pushes that change to do additional preparation.
That's a great point, because a lot of these board members are also members of other boards or
Hmm.
principals in a different company, and they all have the same issues. And you have to look at it, when those questions do arise, as an opportunity to educate people and to say, here's what we're doing. This is our plan. And don't be afraid to ask for their input, because we're not the experts on everything. And I have found very simple answers from contract security officers who are on the spot and dealing with this issue. And I'm not. I'm in management. I'm running around, got 100 different fires. And if you can take the time to ask that person what their thoughts are, you might get a surprise answer that you weren't expecting.
Right.
That helps you eliminate something. You have to take input from everybody, from, the security guard on the boots on the ground, all the way up to, the CEOs, and try to meld it to your plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, JJ, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Really fascinating stories about Live and Augusta tournaments. And you were a CPA way back in the day, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So our audience is business leaders and CPAs and insurance brokers. So you're kind of an example of, you start out studying a certain field, and then you kind of, I guess if you look back, you know, like, how did I get here to managing a event? When years ago
Well,
you'd been studying to
think about it. I
be an
mean,
accountant.
CPAs are risk management as well. I
Yeah.
mean, you're trying to present statements fairly and you're trying to find the issues. And it's the same thing with security. You're trying to eliminate the issues.
Yeah. Yeah. It all applies.
It's not bad to have somebody come in and audit your program too. I mean, think about that. Have a consultant come in and give it a look over.
Hmm.
And you may get some support for a project that you want to do that maybe wasn't being taken totally at face value from you. But when you have somebody come in who's an expert in that area and they recommend it as well, that can help you with getting something implemented as well.
Oh, absolutely. Oftentimes, I don't think people like to be told things are not up to par by an audit, but it's also an opportunity to get the resources to make the fix.
Right.
So, you're leveraging those as an opportunity for improvement, as opposed to simply just surviving it, is an approach people can take. It's a fascinating area, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Our audience members, I think, will learn a lot from, these different areas in event management and just overall managing risk. So JJ, thanks again, and good talking to you.
Good talking to you, Jonathan. Take care. Good luck with everything.
All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.